This episode of Onward to Victory is proudly presented by our good friends at West Coast Screen Printing and Embroidery at wcscreens.com. You've heard their name for years now, and for good reason. If you have needs with screen printing, embroidery, customized promotional items for your company, organization, or more, head over to wcscreens.com and get with my pal Tony and the rest of his team. They have nationwide shipping, wholesale pricing, and exemplary customer service. Not only are they big supporters of this podcast, but, like you, they are also diehard fans of the Fighting Irish. Score a touchdown with wcscreens.com. And on with the show. Today on Onward to Victory, we step into the rough and tumble first decade of the 1900s to build out Notre Dame's all-decade team, a group that helped transform the program from scrappy upstart to emerging power. From trailblazers like Louis Salmon to the controversial and hard-nosed lineman who took down Michigan, this is a roster filled with grit, innovation, and just a little bit of edge. Buckle up those chin straps, Irish fans. This is Onward to Victory.
Onward to victory.
We're going inside them. We're going outside them. Inside them and outside them. And if we get them on the run once, we're going to keep them on the run. And when that's the plan, unless our secondary comes up too close. But don't forget, man, we're going to get them on the run. We're going to go. And we run to the south until we go like goal line. Don't forget, man, today's the day. We're going to win. They can't lick it. It's the black out of the ball. We're going to man with that. Fight.
Hello, Irish fans, and welcome to Onward to Victory, a Notre Dame football podcast. I am your host, Alex Painter. As always, stoked to be here. Today, we march forward with the second installment of our All Decades Team series. Last episode, we tackled the 1880s and 1890s, spotlighting the best players from Notre Dame's earliest football years. Those seasons represented the program's infancy, if you will. So now we move into the first decade of the 1900s, the 20th century, which is perhaps the toddler phase of Notre Dame football. And yes, maybe even its own version of the terrible twos, as we set out to build the all-decades team once more for the 1900s. But first, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that this show is, and has been for a very long time, sponsored by West Coast Screen Printing and Embroidery. You can find them at wcscreens.com. West Coast Screen Printing and Embroidery, when the time comes, they're the ones you want in your corner, delivering every time, especially for those fans of the blue and gold. Thank you for your support. So when we last left our beloved Notre Dame football program, it had evolved from a mostly student-run, almost club sport-like operation into something a little bit more recognizable, the makings of a true program, which was led by Frank E. Herring from 1896 through 1898. Herring's hire is really important when you consider the history of Notre Dame football, because he is one who began to push Notre Dame to more consistently schedule tougher opponents, and he did that his 3 years. In those last 2 years, he wasn't a player coach, so he was solely a head coach, and he kind of served more as an administrator for the program, which is what they had really sorely lacked. But in 1899, the team was helmed by local boxer, Greco-Roman wrestler, and police officer James McWeeny. That dude was awesome, by the way. Maybe when this series wraps up, I'll circle back and give him his own episode. He is simply all over Notre Dame football at this time and was a huge help. And he had some really great quotes too, by the way. But anyway, along the way, the Irish had notched wins, though. This is still the 1890s, over teams like Indiana University, Michigan Agricultural College, later known as Michigan State, and the University of Illinois. But scheduling, as I mentioned earlier, that really was another matter entirely. Consider the 1895 slate for a moment. It was Northwestern's Law School, the Illinois Cycling Club, the Indianapolis Light Artillery, and the University of Illinois Medical School. There you have it. That was the 1895 schedule. An eclectic mix, to say the least. But as I mentioned a moment ago, securing quality opponents on any consistent basis would remain a challenge for years. And even once those opponents began lining up, convincing them to make the trip to South Bend proved to be its own battle. Don't worry, we'll get there soon enough. And speaking of South Bend, most home games in the 1890s were played on Brownson Hall Field, right on campus. As described by the Irish Tribune, quote, "The field was a campus lawn within sight of the Golden Dome, a rectangle scratched into the grass with chalk dust and a rope for a sideline, wedged between the main building and Brownson Hall. 19th century classrooms lined one side, walkways the other. Students leaned from open windows, while priests and professors crossed through, slowing as the sounds of the contact grew louder. The crowd stood 3 deep where the rope bowed, and announcements were little more than someone with a strong voice asking people to step back so the ball could be snapped again," end quote. Actually, that one brings up a good point. At this time, it was actually one of the things that, if you were putting on a football game, you had to be very cognizant of the fact that spectators may meander onto the field, and sometimes play resumed with spectators on the field. Other times they cleared the field, but that was actually pretty common. However, by the 1899 season, Cartier Field on Notre Dame's campus was born, mostly out of necessity. Under university president at the time, Father Andrew Morrissey, Notre Dame faced a growing problem. Athletics were boosting school spirit, but they were losing money, largely due to poor facilities and the inability to charge admission at open fields like Brownson Hall. With the support from alumnus and benefactor Warren C. Cartier, whose younger brother George had suited up for the football team in the fall of 1887, the university built an enclosed facility in 1899, allowing ticket sales, sponsorships, both of which helped sustain its athletic programs. While sports at Notre Dame won a significant victory with Cartier Field, Father Morrissey made no bones about the pecking order on campus. Quote, "Athletics, to be sure, are subordinate to morals and the attainments of the mind, but its functions are positive," end quote. Regardless, what was important was that Cartier Field, which could comfortably seat around 500 to 600 at its creation, was built. An athletic culture on Notre Dame's campus, which is still obviously enjoyed today, was being fostered. And Cartier Field would serve as the home facility for Notre Dame through the 1928 season. And we will talk about Cartier Field time and time again through the next few episodes. So now, we consider the Notre Dame All-1900s team. So let's start with an overview, which I think that was an effective way to kind of set the stage last episode, so we'll keep doing it. During the decade, 1900 through 1909, the team experienced great success. Its first celebrity coach, its first football superstar, an undefeated, unscored-upon season, the biggest blowout in program history, and its first true signature win. That's a busy decade indeed. A quick note on the enrollment of the university during this time we are discussing. It remained relatively steady at the turn of the century, with about 775 students in 1900 and roughly the same in 1905. But by 1910, that number had actually risen to 981, so pressing 1,000. At any rate, let's continue with the overall record for the decade. During those 10 seasons, the team had a 65-win, 15-loss, and 6-tie record. Good for about a 791 winning percentage. So, in other words, they won 79.1% of their games. Not too shabby there. It built on the 660 winning percentage of the 1880s and 1890s. Leadership was a little less fluid, perhaps, than the decade before, but there was still some nebulousness. For the 1900 and 1901 seasons, the team was coached by Pat O'Day. And for my money, he's one of the most fascinating figures in Notre Dame football history. He was a product of the University of Wisconsin, and he was an All-American in both 1898 and 1899. The Australian-born fullback built his reputation less as a runner and more as a kicker. His drop kicking and punting brought him widespread acclaim. He once drop-kicked a 62-yard field goal into a blizzard and was credited with multiple punts exceeding 100 yards. He was known as the kangaroo kicker because of his Australian roots, and he quickly became something of a celebrity on Notre Dame's campus. And again, when I described the coaching situation in the previous episode, I did use that word intentionally, fluid. And while things settled somewhat in this decade, there are still some unusual moments. In the final game of the 1901 season, for instance, Notre Dame faced the South Bend Athletic Association, locally commonly called the Studebakers in the press. O'Day not only joined the opposing side for that game, but he also scored their only touchdown against the very team he was being paid to coach in a 22-6 Notre Dame win. So yes, O'Day suited up for the Studebakers and scored the lone touchdown against Notre Dame. The game actually was physical and rather contentious, and apparently fisticuffs happened pretty consistently throughout, and O'Day was reportedly dismissed shortly afterward. Where it gets a little interesting, too, is by 1917, the kangaroo kicker had vanished without a trace. Around Wisconsin and alumni circles, it was widely believed that he had joined an Australian unit passing through San Francisco, and he was killed in action during World War I. But in reality, he had quietly slipped away. In 1934, he was finally located in a remote Northern California timber town, living under the assumed name of Clarence Mitchell. For nearly 2 decades, O'Day had come close to disappearing entirely, seeking a life removed from both fame and controversy, including an unproven embezzlement accusation that followed him. Once rediscovered, however, he gradually embraced his past. As college football grew in prominence in the decades that followed, O'Day became a living link to the game's earliest days, a relic, if you will, of its rough formative years. In 1902, the team is often listed as being coached by former player James Farragher, including in many books and even in some official program records. In reality, team captain Louis Salmon handled the coaching duties. Farragher was not a consistent presence and did not even arrive on campus until after the first game of the 1902 season. Salmon, a fullback, led practices, handled game planning, and spoke to the media. In effect, he served as both captain and head coach. The same was true in 1903. In fact, there is little evidence that Farragher was even in South Bend that fall, despite often being credited as head coach. For the purposes of this episode, Salmon should be understood as a true player coach in 1902 and 1903 because that's exactly what he was. At some point, the record really needs to be corrected officially. As you may be aware, I spent several years researching these seasons while writing a book on Salmon, and I agree with historian Murray Sperber, who described Farragher as a, quote, ghost during the years he is credited with leading the program. There is a larger story there, but that is one for another time. So in 1904, after completing his playing career, Salmon officially took over as head coach. He was followed in 1905 by his friend and teammate Henry McGlue, nicknamed Fuzzy for his hair. During these 2 seasons, Notre Dame employed what might be called a graduate model, turning to recent players to lead the program. In 1906 and 1907, the team was coached by former Brown All-American Thomas Berry, who found success in the win column even as Notre Dame continued to secure consistent high-level competition. In 1908, the program was led by Victor Place, who may well be the only Notre Dame head football coach, at least that I'm aware of, to have earned a law degree from Harvard Law School. True story. Then in 1909 and beyond, though slightly outside the scope of this episode, the team was guided by Frank Longman, better known as Shorty. So there you have it, a coaching timeline that is a little less fluid than before, but still full of quirks, contradictions, and characters. You'll notice that this decade's list includes 7 players, along with a coach and 4 honorable mentions. That is about where these lists will settle moving forward. This one, by the way, was far more difficult to put together than the 1880s and the 1890s. Not that your host is asking for any sympathy here. Let's start with honorable mentions. Lafayette, Indiana product Pete Vaughn is one of our honorable mentions. A fullback during the 1908 and 1909 seasons, Vaughn earned All-Western honors both years and was widely regarded as the greatest fullback in the West. He even drew natural comparisons to the fullback who will appear later on this list. And frankly, if that fullback that we're going to talk about later hadn't been at Notre Dame, Pete Vaughn would probably not be an honorable mention. Halfback James Dorr is also an honorable mention. That is Dorr, D-O-A-R. The Hammond, Wisconsin native played in 1901 and 1902 and was a blazing speedster who complemented the hard-charging fullback Lewis Salmon. Salmon, again, was the one, if it was not obvious, who Pete Vaughn drew comparisons to, and Salmon's going to play a heavy role in this episode. There's just no getting around that. But Dorr scored 7 touchdowns and broke off numerous long runs. After his playing days, he returned to the upper Midwest to work for the Northwestern Telephone Company. Tragically, he died of appendicitis in April 1905 at age just 23. In his tribute in the school newspaper, he was remembered as a man of character, faith, and honor. A couple linemen round out the honorable mentions. First is William Edwards, better known as Cap, a guard on the 1908-1909 teams, and he was the captain of the 1909 team, which, again, makes his nickname very astute. At about 6 feet and over 200 pounds, he was a commanding presence on the field and anchored a team that was both legendary and controversial, as we will discuss. The 1909 Football Review noted that despite early season injuries, he played in every game and stood out as a strong defensive player who could also carry the ball and receive forward passes. After Notre Dame, Cap went on, to an early career in professional football. He even teamed up with Jim Thorpe on the Canton Bulldogs in 1920 before he served as the team's head coach in 1921, which further cemented his place among the game's early important figures. And the final honorable mention is Frank Shaughnessy, better known as Shag. Shag suited up at end for 4 seasons from 1901 through 1904. According to my research, he did score 9 touchdowns in that 1903 season, and he served as team captain in 1904. During a game against Kansas in 1904, which was a 24-5 Notre Dame loss, Notre Dame's lone touchdown came from a 108-yard touchdown scamper from Shag. Pretty impressive. But he was a very gifted football player and an even better baseball player. Perhaps most famously, he actually served as president of the International League, AAA minor league, from 1936 through 1960. Taken together, these honorable mentions give you a strong sense of the era, speed in the backfield, toughness up front, and players who helped carry the program forward in its early days, and each in their own way left a mark on Notre Dame football, even if they fall just short of the final list. We had a number of ball players who fell just short of the honorable mention list as well, so again, the selection is going to be a little bit more difficult moving forward. Now, let's move on to the main selections. Starting at quarterback, that is the aforementioned Henry McGlue. Again, better known as Fuzzy because of his hair. It was like kind of neatly parted down the middle. You could tell. You don't even have to pat it. You could just tell it was soft. He led the team from 1901 through 1903 before returning as head coach in 1905. He was actually one of the few players at this time on the roster with prior prep experience. He played high school ball at Fairfield Military School in upstate New York. McGlue brought a steady presence to the position and was widely regarded as a sure-handed field general. Reputedly, he never fumbled once during his career. And if you read game recaps during this time, people are constantly, particularly the quarterback, are constantly fumbling the ball. They're getting sacked and fumbling the ball. They mishandle the snaps and fumble the ball. It just happens nonstop. Read a game recap, and it's actually can be quite humorous. Some games, the fumbling, it's like an epidemic. But reputedly, McGlue never fumbled. And though injuries, including a significant knee issue in 1902, limited him at times, his leadership and command of the offense were critical during these seasons. When he returned to the program as head coach in 1905, McGlue guided Notre Dame to one of its most lopsided victories, a 142-0 rout over the American College of Medicine and Surgery, where the team scored 27 touchdowns in 33 minutes. Now, 2 records were set that day that will not be broken. This is like Cy Young's 511 wins, or insert any record here that, like, I know they say records are meant to be broken. Some just will not. This, of course, includes the 142 points scored. Now, I mean, it'd be something to see someone score that many points in a football game, but it's just simply not going to happen. So 142 points in a game is an unbreakable record in program history. And in that game, too, the team missed 20 extra points. 20 extra points. So there you have it. Under Fuzzy's tutelage, though, the team had an overall record that season of 5-4. So taken together, his contributions as both quarterback and coach make him one of the more quietly essential figures in the early development of Notre Dame football. Let's stay in the backfield for a minute. Fullback Louis Salmon, often called Red due to his unmistakable red hair, is the no doubt about it pick for fullback. In fact, Salmon may be, as far as I'm concerned, the best player in Notre Dame football history, not named George Gipp, at least relative to his contemporaries. Salmon's production on the field was nothing short of extraordinary. The Syracuse, New York product's 36 career touchdowns stood as a Notre Dame record for more than 80 years, as did his 250 career points. His 105 points in 1903 remained the single-season standard for decades, and his scoring rate that year still ranks among the best the program has ever seen. Lou was able to accumulate so many points, too, even though touchdowns at the time were only worth 5 points because he was also the team's kicker. So his statistical record kind of has been glossed over for a very, very long time. But what we do know is this. For a period of years, Salmon was Notre Dame football. He was the program's first true national star. In 1903, Salmon became the first Notre Dame player selected to Walter Camp's All-American team, a remarkable achievement for a school still fighting for recognition on the national stage. That season in 1903, Notre Dame went undefeated and unscored upon, and Salmon was at the center of it all, running, kicking, leading, and when needed, quite literally, coaching. He would actually take himself out of games so he could better coach the team. If you know much about football rules at this point, could be very stringent. Substitution rules, very stringent. If a player left the game, they actually couldn't re-enter. There was no running off the field to grab a quick shot of water or, get your breath back. If you left, that was it for you. So if Lou left the game to better direct the team, he couldn't go back in as fullback. So I often think about how many more touchdowns he could have scored if he didn't have to coach as well. His toughness was perhaps best illustrated in the 1902 game against Michigan, where he repeatedly met the great touchdown machine, Willie Heston, head-on. At a time when Michigan was among the elite programs in the country, Salmon did not just compete, he imposed himself physically. He tackled Heston and others with this ferocity that earned respect on both sides. In an era that was, as one observer put it, closer to a fight than a game, Salmon thrived. And he was one hell of a punter, too. He would have been coached his first 2 seasons by one of the best punters in the game that season, too, in the Kangaroo kicker Pat Day. And yet, for all that, Salmon was a deeply quiet and humble figure. He did not seek correction when his name was misspelled in print. His name, Salmon, like spelled like the fish, was often, especially his first year, the year plus, it was spelled Sammon. He didn't seem to mind. Chet Grant said he probably wasn't even reading the paper or reading about himself. But nor did he chase recognition as his legend grew. After his playing days, he largely stepped away from the spotlight and, remarkably, rarely returned to campus to bask in what he had helped build. Twice, by my count, twice. There is something almost poetic about that. The foundational figure of the program who chose to just simply move on. Perhaps no one captured Salmon better than Notre Dame historian Chet Grant, who I mentioned just a moment ago. When he reflected on him years later, Grant wrote, quote, "In retrospect, I find something archangelic in Red Salmon's faintly smiling reticence, as if he had come incognito from afar, bearing understanding and empathy for frailties which his own superior nature transcended without pride," end quote. Okay, listen, if you read Chet Grant, that's par for the course. Chet was very flowery, and I love it. But in another reflection, Grant remembered that for him, Notre Dame itself was embodied not by buildings or symbols, but in a, quote, red-headed fullback who came to represent the very spirit of the institution, end quote. And that was Louis Salmon, record setter, trailblazer, a quiet giant, and in many ways the first true standard bearer of Notre Dame football. And of course your Onward to Victory, all 1900s team fullback. Okay, so joining McGlue and Salmon in the backfield is halfback Harry Miller, also known as Red. So we have two Reds on the squad here, but Red Miller suited up for Notre Dame from 1906 through 1909. A native of Defiance, Ohio, Miller was the first of 5 Miller brothers to play for the Irish. He was followed by Don, Ray, Walter, and Jerry. He would later become the father of future Notre Dame All-American Creighton Miller, whom he had fittingly named after Creighton University. Miller was a key figure on the 1909 undefeated squad. That 1909 team was often referred to as the champion of the West. He earned third-team All-American honors from Walter Camp that season. And again, that 1909 team holds a special place in program history, for it was in 1909 that the team finally broke through against the University of Michigan. And after 8 unsuccessful attempts, the 11-3 victory that year over the Wolverines was decisive and, frankly, could be considered program-defining. Now, that 11-3 contest, or I should say result, did not sit well with Michigan head coach Fielding Yost, who was so incensed by the loss, and perhaps Notre Dame's growing stature, that he refused to schedule the Irish again. True to his word, the two programs would not meet again for more than 30 years, not until after Yost had retired. But anyway, contemporary accounts made it clear just how dominant Notre Dame, and Miller in particular, had been that day. As the Chicago Record-Herald noted, quote, "From the opening of the first round until the referee's whistle blew, it was Notre Dame's inning. Michigan seemed unable to solve its opponent's formations or to stop Miller," end quote. So Harry Red Miller. He's your halfback. Next up, we're going to the line. It's guard Pat Beacom, who played from 1903 through 1906, and frankly, maybe one of the most overlooked great players in Notre Dame football history. Notre Dame historian Cappy Gagnon has called Beacom his no-doubter choice for that distinction, and it's pretty easy to see why. Even playing along the line, Beacom found the end zone 18 times and added 11 extra points. That might sound odd by modern standards, but just keep in mind, in that era, linemen could actually legally step back from the line, behind the line of scrimmage, to receive a lateral or a handoff. And Beacom made the most of it. At 6'2" and around 230 pounds, yeah, man, he was a massive presence for the time. And quite dangerous with the ball in his hands. But Beacom was as steady as he was dominant. Over 33 games across 4 seasons, he started every single contest at either left guard or left tackle, and he never left the field. Beacom knew, again, if I leave the field, I can't go back in. But in my email conversations with Cappy, that mark of 33 games started was second at the time, only to Lewis Salmon, who started 34. But he served as team captain in 1905. So again, 1905, Beacom is captain, and just kind of thread the needle. This is the year that Fuzzy McGlue is head coach. And Beacom earned all Western honors in 1906, and he graduated with a pharmacy degree later. So after his final home game, the students carried him off the field in recognition of his career. And the scholastic Notre Dame student newspaper went so far as to call him the finest lineman Notre Dame had produced to that point. The Notre Dame Football Review of 1906 captured both his presence and the feeling of his departure. Quote, "Everyone knows Big Pat, the giant tackle of the gold and blue. We are sorry to lose him. He was a great player and a loyal student," end quote. Beacom's impact did not end in South Bend. In 1907, he went on to play professionally with the Massillon Tigers, which included an early appearance in a Thanksgiving game in Chicago, which was one of the earliest professional contests played in the city. So in an era full of Iron Men, Pat Beacom stood out even among them. Durable, versatile, and rather quietly exceptional. All right, another pair of linemen here. George Philbrook, a guard from 1908 through 1911, and Ralph Dimmick, a tackle from 1908 to 1910. They were friends, they were teammates, and line mates. And the two were central figures in that epic 1909 win over Michigan. And as it turns out, a bit of controversy followed them as well. By the time the pair arrived at Notre Dame in 1908, both had already logged college football experience at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington. Dimmick had also played at Pacific University. Man, they were steamrollers up front. Philbrook was listed at 6'2" and 200 pounds, and he may have been one of the best pound-for-pound athletes Notre Dame had in its early decades. Dimmick, meanwhile, was a tough-nosed presence on the line. As the 1908 Football Review put it, quote, "He was always there to help along the man with the ball, and he could open up life-sized gaps when the play was directed his way," end quote. He was also among the team's most reliable tacklers during his time. Both men were pivotal in Notre Dame's 1909 victory over Michigan and the program's claim as champions of the West. That same game, I should say, is often credited with the moment the nickname the Fighting Irish began to take hold, a version of events that is still widely accepted today. And only because I can't help myself, I have to share this. History, as it often does, can complicate things. Even in a 58-0 loss back in 1904, Notre Dame picked up something kind of lasting. The South Bend Tribune referred to the team as the Fighting Irishmen, which just adds another early chapter to the nickname's origin story. The legend, it seems, may not have started in triumph alone. But anyways, back to that Michigan game. Michigan coach Fielding Yost was not pleased that Dimmick and Philbrook had suited up. He knew of their previous college experience. He raised concern about their eligibility. Again, concerns that may not have been entirely unfounded. That said, eligibility rules at the time were loosely enforced at best, and it is fair to say that Yost did not take losing lightly. Some have characterized him as fiercely anti-Catholic, while others argue he simply hated to lose. What is certain is this: he felt wronged, and he refused to schedule Notre Dame again for the remainder of his career. And as for the two excellent linemen, their stories diverged sharply. Philbrook went on to achieve a remarkable athletic feat, competing in the decathlon in the 1912 Summer Olympics in Stockholm, where he briefly challenged Jim Thorpe in the early events before ultimately not finishing. Dimmick's story, tragically, ended much sooner. In 1911, while playing in a Pacific University alumni game, he was injured and later developed pneumonia. Hospitalized and reportedly in a delirious state, he either fell or jumped from his second-story window and died. Triumph and tragedy. Episode 68 on Onward to Victory tells their story in full, but there is no question. Dimmick and Philbrook were bona fide, if slightly controversial, pillars of Notre Dame's early line. To round out the all-decade team, at least from a player standpoint, we turn to end Frank Lonergan, better known as Happy. A native of Polo, Illinois, Lonergan suited up for Notre Dame from 1901 through 1903. He stood 5 foot 11 inches tall and weighed about 165 pounds. In 1903, he even shifted to halfback on that Louis Salmon-led All-American season, unbeaten, unscored upon team. But Lonergan clearly made an impression. The 1903 Football Review praised him with a lofty comparison to one of the stars of the 1890s and someone who was on our 1880s and 1890s team. Quote, "Not since the days of the famous Tiger Lily, John Farley, has such a dashing halfback been seen on our gridiron as the Rooter's idol. Happy Lonergan." End quote. Hey, that's no small praise. Pop Farley was one of the defining players of Notre Dame's very early era. But it was Lonergan himself, though, who piled up 20 touchdown runs in his career. 20. Not too shabby. That's the same as modern-day powerhouses Josh Adams and Dexter Williams. Yeah, 20 touchdowns. Man, that's not too bad, especially for that era. His story does not end on the field, though. Lonergan later served in the Oregon House of Representatives. He became Speaker during the 1931 session as well. And he went on to serve as a judge in Multnomah County in 1945. It's not a bad legacy there for Happy. Now, who's going to coach this squad? That's easy. That'd be Frank Shorty Longman. His 2 seasons at the helm, 1909 and 1910, which 1909 is the only season that hits the scope of this episode, but it was that impactful for the soon-to-be-called Irish. That 1909 campaign, punctuated by the win over Michigan, stands as one of the true turning points in program history. In just 2 years, Longman posted an 11-1-2 record, and again helped push Notre Dame onto a bigger stage. In 1910, there was a freshman on the team, and his name was Knute Rockne, so Longman was also Rockne's first head coach. And yes, we've talked about Fielding Yost and his lingering disdain for that 1909 team. What probably didn't help matters? Longman himself. Shorty was a Michigan man, a former player under Yost, which already probably made that loss sting a little bit more when the understudy beats the teacher. But Longman also had a bit of an edge to him. In the offseason between 1909 and 1908, he reportedly had a sweater knitted for his dog with 11-3 stitched across it. A not-so-subtle reminder of Notre Dame's victory. But the kicker here was that Longman was living in Ann Arbor at the time. So that's not just winning, it's kind of twisting the knife. But of all the coaches we've talked about, it has to be Shorty. So, to sum it up, here you go. Henry Fuzzy McGlue, quarterback, a steady, sure-handed field general who never fumbled and later returned as coach and helped shape Notre Dame's early structure and success. Louis Red Salmon, fullback, the program's first true superstar, a record-setting All-American and player coach whose dominance defined Notre Dame football in its earliest years. Harry Red Miller, halfback, a dynamic playmaker and All-American who powered the 1909 champions of the West and helped deliver a program-defining win over Michigan. Guard tackle Pat Beacom, a durable Ironman lineman with rare scoring ability to say the least, whose consistency and toughness made him one of the era's most overlooked greats. George Philbrook, guard, a powerful, highly athletic lineman, and a future Olympian whose presence anchored the line during Notre Dame's rise to national relevance. Tackle Ralph Dimmick, a rugged, dependable tackler and elite defender whose physical play helped define the line during that pivotal 1909 season. And later halfback, Frank Happy Lonergan, a versatile and explosive athlete who transitioned to halfback and scored 20 touchdowns and became one of the early program's most dynamic threats. And coach Frank Shorty Longman, the brash Michigan-trained coach who led Notre Dame to a breakthrough era, including a seismic win over his alma mater that helped shape the program's trajectory. Man, I hope you enjoyed that. That was the first decade of the 20th century, the 1900s. Next up is the 1910s. If you want to stump for your favorite guy, my guess is more emails and messages might come through once we get to, a little bit more modern time. But if you do have somebody that you'd like to advocate for, don't hesitate to send the show a Facebook message or an email at onwardtovictorypodcast@gmail.com. Next up is the 1910s. It's about to get really good, but I do hope you enjoyed yet another slice of Notre Dame football history. And with that, I guess I'll let you go for today. This has been Onward to Victory, a Notre Dame football podcast. And in kindness, I am your host, Alex Painter. And as always, friends, go Irish!